Okay, guys, welcome back to tonight's lesson, lesson 29. This is my second do-over between the interruptions of the phone and the overhead speaker, so maybe filming from home might be my better option. We'll have to see. But tonight we're going to talk about lesson 29. And our objective tonight is to connect division by a unit fraction to division by 1/10 and 1/100th. So when I think about what that really means, the word connect, that means I'm going to think about something that I already know and I'm going to put two pieces together like a puzzle. I'm going to connect those puzzle pieces. So I'm going to connect division by a fraction to division by, this is a fraction, but this is unit form. And so what I want to take a moment here to remind you of is this up here says the word 1/10 and this says 1/100th, but we can write that three different ways depending on what kind of unit that we are working in. So for example, if we're working with fractions, I would say 1/10 and I would draw 1/10 like that. If I were talking about decimals, I would write 1/10 like this, 0.1. Those are both things that we already know. The other thing that we already know that we usually don't use as much is the unit form, which means that there's a word attached. And so this is 1/10. So today we're going to be using a fraction, but we're also going to be using decimals in unit form with the fractions. So it's a little bit different than what we've been doing. If you notice though, it says unit fraction. So that means that no matter what, my numerator is still going to be 1 because that is what makes a unit fraction. So let's go ahead and let's get started on problem 1. And so problem 1 looks like this. 7 divided by 1/10. Now, you're looking at that thinking, well, I've never done that before. But really, you have. Because I'm going to reach into my toolbox and I'm going to rename this guy. I'm going to change his name. Now, you can rewrite 1/10 using the fraction. Now, does that look like something you've done before? Right, that's exactly what we've been doing. This is what last night's lesson was about. And so I have 7 divided by 1/10. And so what this question is really asking me is, how many 1/10ths does it take to make 7? So I'm going to kind of spell something out here, do a little bit of review. And I want you to realize the process, because I know many of us are saying, well, you just multiply that and that. Well, okay, but let's figure out why for just a minute. So let's think about the fractions and what kind of fraction makes a whole. So,
Line 5, please call 304.
So if I am talking about tenths, and I want to know how many tenths are in one whole, that means here's my fraction, and I want to know what number over 10 equals 1. Well, I hope you all just said the number 10. So 10 tenths equals 1 whole. Well, this time, though, I don't have 1 whole. In this problem, I have 7 wholes. So I would take those 10 tenths, and it's going to take 7 of them. And so when I do that, I end up with this. There are 70 tenths in 1 whole. And what that means is I could take 1 whole plus 2 plus 3 wholes plus 4 wholes, 5 wholes, 6 wholes, and 7 wholes. And when I do that, my denominator stays the same, and look at what I get. I get 70 tenths. So here it is in fraction form. Here it is in word form, okay? Or unit form, I'm sorry. So that's why we're taking that 7 and multiplying it by 10. Because really we're saying how many tenths does it take to make 70? We kind of work it backwards from the way we read it. Excuse me. If you're still a little confused, I want you to think about what we did last night. And last night we had our whole, which in this case would be 7. And we were breaking it down into tenths and trying to figure out how many tenths was it going to take to make 7. And we wrote our number sentence. And again, we got 70. So this is something that you already know to do, but this is just a little bit more explaining about why we do that. So if you need a minute to catch up, go ahead and pause it here or rewind it here. I know a lot of you were still kind of struggling today with whole number divided by fraction. That's going to be another whole number. It's not going to be a fraction. A fraction divided by a fraction is going to give you a fraction. So it's a little bit different because we always think of division as getting smaller. But if I took a piece of paper that was 7 meters long and I cut it into meters that were 1/10 of a meter, think about me, visualize me cutting off a piece of paper, and each time that piece of paper falls on the table, I would have 70 pieces of paper all together. So that's kind of what this tape diagram represents. Now, on number 2, our problem looks a little bit different. So, problem 2. And this time my problem is 7 and 4/10, make sure you guys can see that decimal on there, divided by 1/10. Now, what do you notice on there that's different this time from the first one? There's my first problem. We're still dividing by 1/10. This time, though, we have 7 and 4/10, not just 7. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit tricky here. So what we want to do is we want to work smarter, not harder. And we want to kind of use what we already know. So when I think about this problem, I already found out, let me switch this way, 7 and 4/10 divided by 1/10. Well, I just found out that in just 7 wholes, there are 70 tenths, right? So that's the same thing right there. But then I have this extra 4/10. So here's 70 tenths, and then I have this leftover 4/10. What do you think I might do with that 70 tenths and 4/10? I hope you said you would add them together. So that takes care of my whole number. So I have 70 tenths now, plus 4/10, and so that would give me 74 tenths, which for our answer, we are going to write 74 tenths. And that is our answer. Okay? So if you have any questions, this is a good chance to pause or go back and rewind.
Sarah Hare, if you're still in the building, please call 300. Sarah Hare, please call 300.
All right, so now if I had 6 divided by 0.1, we know that that is 6 divided by 1/10. So how many tenths would it take to make 6? Should be 60. I hope you are kind of catching on to the pattern here, because this is the same thing as 6 divided by 1/10. And so it's taking what we've already known and we're kind of connecting our learning together. So that would be 60. All right, let's go ahead and move on to problem 3. Obviously, you've noticed that these are not in your workbook tonight. So in your workbook, if you're still struggling, I will post another video where I worked through some of the problem set, so that way when you come in tomorrow, we can work on the homework. But if this is making no sense to you, then I will post a separate video here in just a few minutes where I work on the homework. All right, so problem 3. I'm just going to do letter A so I don't have to keep writing this. So I have letter A, and it is 7 divided by, I've changed, haven't I? My place value has changed. I'm no longer looking at 1/10, but now I'm looking at 1/100ths. Good. So 7 divided by 1/100th. Now, if I'm pausing, that means I'm wanting you to say the answer out loud like we are in class. So don't make me look foolish. Say the answers out loud. All right, so I'm going to rewrite that as 7 divided by 1/100th. So can I use what I already know from my 1/10ths to help me with this problem? I absolutely can. So on the last problem, I said that there are blank, and I said tenths, but now we're talking about hundredths. Hundredths in one whole. All right, so again, how many hundredths does it take to make one whole? It takes 100, right? So that means that that's just one whole. If I have 7 wholes, how many hundredths is it going to take? And the answer should be 700. So 700. All right. So as I'm looking at my problems here, the numbers are just kind of getting better. I'm still using the same processes. I'm still turning these decimals into a fraction. I'm still multiplying like I did yesterday. The only thing that I've done differently is that the numbers are getting bigger. So what if I had, I'm going to put a B here, what if I had 7 4/10 divided by 1/100ths? Think about that for just a minute. You can flip back to the page where we did divided by 1/10, but what happens to that 7 4/10 when I divide it by hundredths? All right, so let's think about it. So we know that we have 7 4/10. All right, how many hundredths are in 7 wholes? There's 700. 7 hundredths in 7 wholes. So we've already done that part. So how many hundredths are there in 4/10? So what does that mean? What that means is this. If I had my hundreds grid. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, and I colored in 4/10. 2, 3, 4. All right, we can say that as 4/10, right? But if I'm talking about hundredths, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and of course I ran out of room. Now, how many squares have I actually filled in? I have filled in 40 squares. Okay, so I'm taking what I know about the tenths and I'm applying it to hundredths. So I filled in 40 more of those hundredths on my hundredths charts. So again, what can I do with that 700 hundredths and 40 hundredths? Well, I'm hoping you notice that we're going to add them together, which gives me 740 hundredths. All right, so now we're going to move on and work some more. So this time, we're going to look at the number 7 and 49 hundredths divided by 1/100th. So think about what we've done so far. And think about, we've got one more digit here. What might that look like? All right, so I'm going to think about it here. And I'm going to say that I would have 7 hundredths. I already found that out. And then I have 40 hundredths because that was 7.4. I worked that in the last problem. Now, where is this 9? The 9 is already in the hundredths place. So again, I would add them together and I would get 749 hundredths. Okay, so see how that works? We're really, if you think about what used to be kind of expanded form, what we used to call expanded form, we're pulling in that schema that we have to help us solve these division problems. Now, I could also say that this is the same thing as 1/100th, right? And then I could take that 1/100th and multiply it, which would mean that my decimal would move 1 time, 2 times, and I would also get 749. So there's a couple of different ways that we can work this. So I'm going to take just a moment here and give you the opportunity to look back on these. The lesson went pretty quick, so rewind if you need to. I'm going to go ahead and make another video where I work the problem set to give you a little bit more practice in seeing how that is going to work. So again, if you're having any questions, go ahead and jot those down on your notes. Come in tomorrow ready to work the homework side. All right, thanks guys.